Have you ever bought something at a bargain price only to find out someone else thinks it belongs to them? My name is Frank Johnson. I spent my entire life savings to buy a lakeside ranch at a bankruptcy auction. Legal, fully documented. Everything was clear until I drove up to take possession. 3 pickup trucks blocked my gate. 3 people claiming to represent the HOA. And a notice demanding $47,000 within 48 hours, or they would seize the home I had just purchased. Here is the problem I checked. My ranch was not part of any HOA, so who were they? And why did they want my property? Drop a comment below, letting me know where you are watching from. This story is long, but I promise it is worth staying until the end. The road to my new life was a narrow dirt path cutting through pine trees, and I remember thinking how perfect it all seemed. The auction had closed 3 weeks ago. The title company had confirmed everything was clean. I had the deed in my glove compartment, notarized and recorded with the county, after a divorce that took half of everything I had built. This bankrupt Lakeside ranch was supposed to be my second chance. 47 acres of overgrown pasture, a farmhouse that needed work, and a private dock on a lake so quiet you could hear fish jumping at dawn. I had paid $183,000 in cash, every penny of my savings, for a property valued at $400,000 before the previous owner defaulted. This was not an impulse buy. I had spent 3 months researching the title history, the tax records, and the zoning laws. I knew this land better than I knew my own apartment. I saw the trucks before I saw the gate. 3 pickup trucks were parked in a V formation, blocking the entire entrance to my property. They were not police vehicles. They were not county trucks. They were personal vehicles, but each one had a magnetic sign on the door that read, Lakeview Estates HOA Official Business. I slowed my car to a stop about 20 feet away. A woman in a navy blue vest stood at the center, clipboard in hand, watching me approach. 2 others flanked her, another woman and a man, both with their arms crossed. The vest had a logo embroidered on it. I squinted. The font looked like Comic Sans, not the kind of typography any legitimate organization would use for official materials. I stepped out of my car, leaving the engine running. The woman with the clipboard walked toward me with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you have authority. She was in her mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back tight, reading glasses perched on her nose. Her name tag said Christine Gray, HOA President. She did not offer her hand. She did not smile. "Are you the individual who purchased the Morrison property at auction?" she asked. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. I told her yes, I was Frank Johnson, and I had the deed right here if she needed to see it. She shook her head slowly, as if I had said something naive. "The deed is irrelevant," she said. "This property is under HOA jurisdiction. The previous owner owed $47,000 in unpaid assessments. There's a lien on this property. Until that debt is settled, you cannot take possession." I asked her to show me the documentation of this lien. I asked her when it was recorded. I asked her which county office had processed it. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. "You'll receive everything by email within the hour," she said. "But I'm authorized to inform you that if the balance is not paid within 48 hours, the HOA will exercise its right to confiscate the property." Confiscate. The word landed wrong. In real estate, the term is foreclosure. Confiscation was what the police did with contraband. It was not what homeowner associations did with property. Nobody who actually worked in property law would make that mistake. The man stepped forward. He was younger, maybe early 40s, with a shaved head and a polo shirt that strained against his shoulders. His name tag read, Greg Nolan Enforcement. Another red flag. HOAs had boards and committees. They did not have enforcement officers. He positioned himself between me and the gate, feet planted wide. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises," he said. I reminded him that these were my premises. I owned them. He shrugged. "Take it up with the county, but right now, You're on HOA managed land, and you're not authorized to be here. I pulled out my phone to take a photograph of the trucks and signs. The second woman, her name tag said Evelyn Watson, secretary, stepped into my frame immediately, raising her hand to block the camera. "No photographs," she said. "This is a private HOA matter." I lowered my phone and studied all three of them. Christine Gray with her clipboard, Greg Nolan with his planted feet, Evelyn Watson with her hand still raised. They were not nervous. They were not uncertain. They moved in coordination without needing to look at each other. I asked Christine Gray one more question. "If I pay the $47,000, what guarantees do I have that this won't happen again?" She smiled for the first time. It was not a pleasant smile. "Once the debt is cleared, you'll receive a certificate of compliance," she said. "But I should warn you, our annual assessments are $12,000, and there are additional fees for dock usage, road maintenance, and community security. This is an expensive neighborhood. Mr. Johnson, make sure you can afford it." $12,000 a year, plus additional fees, plus the $47,000 up front. They were not just demanding payment. They were establishing a pipeline. I got back in my car without arguing. As I backed down the dirt road, I watched them in my rearview mirror. Christine Gray had her phone out, making a call. She was smiling and nodding, like someone delivering good news. Greg Nolan was laughing at something Evelyn Watson had said. They looked relaxed, satisfied, like people who had just completed a familiar routine. I pulled onto the main road and drove toward the nearest town, cataloging every detail, the Comic Sans logo that no professional would approve, the word confiscate that no lawyer would use, the enforcement title that no legitimate HOA would create. The magnetic signs could be removed in 30 seconds. The coordinated blocking of my camera. The refusal to show documentation until after I had left. None of it fit the pattern of a real lien dispute. All of it fit the pattern of something else. I found a motel 6 miles down the highway, checked in, and opened my laptop. The email from Christine Gray had already arrived. 3 attachments, a notice of lien, a demand letter, and an excerpt from HOA bylaws. I scanned the notice of lien first. No file number, no recording stamp, no reference to the county recorder's office, just a document that looked official but contained none of the markers that would make it legally binding. I checked the clock. 47 hours remained. $47,000 demanded, and a set of documents that raised more questions than they answered. If Christine Gray was telling the truth, my title company had made a catastrophic error, and I was about to lose everything. But if she was lying, if this was what I suspected it was, then I had just become the target of something far more deliberate than a billing dispute. I needed to find out which one it was, and I needed to find out fast. I did not sleep that night. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, but I barely noticed. I sat on the bed with my laptop open. The glow of the screen, the only light in the room. Reading through the documents Christine Gray had sent. 3 attachments. 3 pieces of evidence that were supposed to prove I owed $47,000 to an organization I had never heard of before today. The notice of lien looked official at first glance, bold headers. Legal language. A seal at the bottom that resembled something governmental. But the cracks showed quickly. No file number, no recording date, no reference to the county recorder's office, where all legitimate liens must be filed. The seal was not embossed, it was a flat image. The kind you could create in basic design software. If I had been panicked, if I had not been paying attention, I might have believed it was real. But I was paying attention. The second attachment was a demand letter from someone named Raymond Voss, identifying himself as legal counsel for Lakeview Estates HOA. The letter was aggressive in a way that felt rehearsed. It claimed that HOA liens had super priority status and survived foreclosure sales. It warned that entering the property without settling the debt would result in criminal trespass charges. It mentioned that Mr. Voss had close working relationships with the county assessor's office and local law enforcement. The language was designed to overwhelm, to make the reader feel surrounded by authority. But the wire transfer instructions at the bottom told me everything I needed to know. The receiving account was not Lakeview Estates HOA Trust. It was R. Voss Holdings LLC, a personal account. Money sent to that account would not go to any homeowners association. It would go directly into someone's pocket. I searched for Raymond Voss on the State Bar website. Every licensed attorney in the state was listed in that database. I typed his name carefully. Checked the spelling twice. 0 results. Raymond Voss was not a licensed attorney in this state. His demand letter was not legal counsel. It was impersonation. I searched for his office address next. The letterhead listed a suite number that sounded professional. But when I looked it up, it was a P.O. box at a shipping store in a strip mall 40 miles away. No physical office, no reception desk, no place where a legitimate law firm would conduct business. I called the phone number on the letterhead. It rang 4 times, then went to a generic voicemail that did not identify any law firm or any person. Just a robotic voice asking me to leave a message. I did not leave a message. There was no point in alerting them that I was checking. I called my title insurance company instead. The office was closed. It was nearly 10 at night, but I left an urgent voicemail explaining the situation. I asked them to confirm whether any lien existed on my property and to call me back first thing in the morning. Title insurance existed precisely for situations like this. If they had missed a legitimate lien during the title search, they would be liable for the damages. If they had not missed anything, if no lien existed, then Christine Gray's entire claim was built on fabricated documents. Either way, I needed their confirmation in writing. The third attachment was an excerpt from the HOA bylaws. This was where Christine Gray made her critical mistake. The document was dated and signed, purportedly showing the establishment of Lakeview Estates, HOA, and its governing rules. The signature date was March 15th, 2012. I pulled up the county assessor's website on another browser tab and searched for Lakeview Estates subdivision. The official records showed that the subdivision was platted and recorded on September 8th, 2014. The math did not work. The HOA bylaws predated the subdivision by more than 2 years. You cannot create governing documents for a community that does not exist yet. Either the bylaws were deliberately backdated to create a false paper trail, or the entire document was fabricated from scratch. I sat back and let the pieces fall into place. A lien with no file number. A demand letter from an unlicensed attorney. Wire transfer instructions pointing to a personal account. Bylaws dated before the subdivision existed, taken individually. Any one of these might have been an administrative error or a clerical mistake, taken together. They formed something far more deliberate, a shakedown dressed in legal language, designed to intimidate people into paying money they did not owe. The question was, how many people had already fallen for it? I searched online for any mention of Lakeview Estates HOA. The results were sparse, a few references in county meeting minutes, a business registration with the Secretary of State, nothing substantial. Then I found a local community forum with a post from 3 years ago, buried in a thread about property disputes in the Lake region. Someone with an anonymous username had written, "Be careful with the HOA near the East Shore. They've swallowed 3 properties in the last 5 years. They target foreclosures and bankruptcy sales. New owners show up, get hit with fake lien demands, and either pay up or get forced out. Nobody fights back because they don't know the system. 3 properties, 5 years. I took a screenshot and saved it to my files. The post had 2 replies. One was from someone saying they had heard similar rumors but had no first-hand experience. The other was from an account that had been deleted. Deleted. Someone had silenced that voice, and I could guess who. Now I understand why Christine Gray and her colleagues chose me. A bankruptcy auction buyer, Someone from out of town, someone without connections to the local community, someone who might panic at official-looking documents and a 48-hour deadline. They had profiled me before I even arrived. They had done this before. They had succeeded before. But they had also made mistakes. The fake attorney was not in the state bar database, the impossible timeline on the bylaws, the personal wire account that bypasses any organizational structure. Each mistake was a thread, and I was beginning to pull. I checked the clock on my laptop. It was past midnight. 41 hours remained on their deadline. I still did not have official confirmation from the county that my property was outside HOA jurisdiction. I still did not have a response from my title company. But I had something more valuable than proof. I had a pattern, and patterns could be traced backward to find their source and forward to predict their next move. I closed my laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The weight on my chest had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the weight of confusion or helplessness. It was the weight of purpose. Christine Gray thought she was dealing with another easy target. Raymond Voss thought his fake letterhead would make me fold. They had built their scheme on the assumption that people would not check, would not question, would not fight back. They had assumed wrong. But even as that resolve hardened inside me, a colder thought crept in. The forum post mentioned 3 properties. 3 families had lost their homes or their money to this scheme over 5 years. That meant Christine Gray and her group were not amateurs running a one-time scam. They had refined their methods. They had learned what worked. Tomorrow morning, I will be at the county recorder's office the moment it opens. I would request every document related to my property, the subdivision, and the HOA. I would find out exactly what jurisdiction they actually had, if any. And if I found what I expected to find, I would not just defend myself. I would find a way to make sure they never did this to anyone else. The forum post said nobody fights back because they do not know the system. But I was beginning to know the system, and I was not going to be number 4. The county recorder's office opened at 8 in the morning. I was there at 7:45, sitting in my car in the parking lot, watching the employees arrive with their coffee cups and their Monday exhaustion. I had not slept more than 2 hours. My eyes burned, and my neck ached from hunching over my laptop. But my mind was sharp. Sharper than it had been in years. When someone tries to take everything you have, clarity becomes a survival mechanism. The moment the front doors unlocked, I was the first person through them. The clerk at the counter was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at me with the patient wariness of someone who had dealt with every kind of desperate person who walked through those doors. I told her I needed to research property records for a parcel I had recently purchased. I gave her the address and the parcel number. She typed it into her computer and asked what specifically I was looking for. I said I needed 3 things: the recorded CC&Rs for any homeowners association covering that parcel, any liens recorded against the property, and the original plat map for the Lakeview Estates subdivision. She nodded without expression and disappeared into a back room. I stood at the counter and waited, my heart beating harder than it should have for something as mundane as a records request. 15 minutes later, she returned with a stack of documents and a computer printout. She spread them across the counter and began walking me through each one with the methodical precision of someone who had explained these things 1,000 times before. The CC&Rs for Lakeview Estates had been recorded 8 years ago when the subdivision was first developed. The document defined the boundaries of the HOA's jurisdiction, 12 residential lots arranged around a private access road, all within a specific surveyed boundary. She pulled out the plat map and pointed to the subdivision, then to my parcel. They were adjacent but legally separate. My property, the old Morrison Ranch, was an unincorporated parcel that predated the subdivision by more than 40 years. It had its own legal description, its own tax identification number, its own chain of title. It was not part of Lakeview Estates and never had been. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it. I asked her to check for liens. She ran the search and shook her head. Nothing. The Notice of Lien. Christine Gray had emailed me, had never been filed with the county. I asked for certified copies of everything and paid $42 in cash. This was the foundation of my evidence file. I drove to a coffee shop with wireless internet and checked my voicemail. My title insurance company had called back while I was at the recorder's office. Their message confirmed what the clerk had told me. No liens, no encumbrances, no HOA covenants attached to my property. The policy was valid. That gave me legal protection. But protection alone would not solve my problem. Christine Gray was still blocking my gate. I pulled up the Secretary of State's business database and searched for Lakeview Estates HOA. The organization was registered, but the details were revealing. Christine Gray was listed as the registered agent. The principal address was the same P.O. box that appeared on Raymond Voss's fake legal letterhead. The organization had failed to file annual reports for 2 consecutive years and was not in good standing with the state. I cross-referenced the names from my confrontation at the gate. Christine Gray, Evelyn Watson, Greg Nolan. All 3 appeared in various HOA filings over the past 5 years. But one name surfaced repeatedly in the background, never as president or secretary, always as legal consultant or advisory counsel. Raymond Voss. He was not on the board, but he was connected to every significant action the organization had taken. Christine handled the confrontations. Voss drafted the documents. The others provided bulk and the appearance of legitimacy. Their operation depended on one simple truth: most people saw official-looking paperwork and assumed it was real. Most people paid just to make the problem disappear. That was what had worked for them before. Whether it would hold up under serious pressure was a different question, one I intended to answer. I had what I needed to defend myself. But defense was not enough. Christine Gray was still out there, still telling the community that I was an intruder on my own property. If I simply waited her out, she would escalate. She would turn neighbors against me. She would make my life impossible until I either paid or walked away. Going on offense meant exposing myself to retaliation. It meant digging into people who had already demonstrated they were willing to lie, threaten, and intimidate to get what they wanted. I did not know how far they would go if they felt cornered, but I knew that staying passive would only invite more pressure for that kind of exposure. I needed more than county records. I needed witnesses. I needed the people Christine Gray had done this to before the ones mentioned in that forum post from 3 years ago. I was packing up my laptop when movement outside the window caught my attention. A familiar pickup truck had parked across the street. Greg Nolan sat in the driver's seat, both hands resting on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the coffee shop entrance. He was not pretending to check his phone. He was not looking at anything else, just sitting there, motionless, watching. The morning sun reflected off his windshield at an angle that should have hidden his face, but he had positioned himself so I could see him clearly. That was deliberate. He wanted me to know he was there. I held his gaze through the glass for a long moment. His expression did not change. Neither did mine. Then I closed my laptop, gathered my folder of certified documents, and walked out the back entrance without looking at him again. I circled the block to reach my car, checking twice to make sure no one had followed me through the alley. My hands were steady as I started the engine, but something cold had settled in my chest. Being watched was one thing. Being watched openly, without any attempt at concealment, was something else. It was a message. They knew I had gone to the county. They knew I was gathering information, and they wanted me to understand that my movements were not private. The question I could not answer was what they planned to do about it. Were they simply trying to intimidate me into backing down, or were they preparing something more direct? I had found cracks in their wall, significant ones. Their fake lien, their fake attorney, their fabricated jurisdiction. But cornered people do not always retreat. Sometimes they attack. I pulled onto the main road and headed toward the address I had found for one of the previous victims. I needed allies. I needed testimony. And I needed to move faster than they expected. before they figured out how much I already knew and decided I had become too dangerous to ignore. I found Elena Ruiz through the forum post. Her username had been deleted, but she had mentioned enough details about her situation: a lakefront cabin purchased at a tax auction in 2019, a demand for $31,000, a forced sale 6 months later that I was able to trace her through county property records. She lived 40 miles north now, in a small apartment complex far from any lake. When I called and explained who I was and why I was reaching out, there was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "I wondered when someone else would find me." We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between us. I arrived early and chose a booth in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard. She walked in 20 minutes later, a woman in her early 50s, tired eyes, gray streaking through dark hair. She sat down across from me and ordered coffee without looking at the menu. Her story confirmed everything I had suspected. She had purchased a small cabin at auction, thinking it was the retirement retreat she had always dreamed of, within a week. Christine Gray and her group had shown up with the same playbook: fake lien, threatening letters, 48-hour deadline. Elena had paid. She had wired $22,000 to an account she now knew belonged to Raymond Voss. But the demands did not stop. They came back 2 months later with additional fees. Then again, 3 months after that. By the time she realized she was being extorted, she had paid over $31,000 and was facing threats of foreclosure for non-compliance. She tried to fight, but she did not know where to start. She did not have the records I had gathered. She did not understand the legal system well enough to know that the HOA had no jurisdiction over her property. Eventually, she sold the cabin at a loss just to escape. Christine Gray's group bought it through a shell company for less than half what Elena had originally paid. I asked if she had kept any documentation. She nodded slowly. She had emails, wire transfer receipts, and copies of every demand letter they had sent. She had kept everything. Not because she planned to use it, but because she could not bring herself to throw away evidence of how badly she had been wronged. I asked if she would be willing to share those documents with me and potentially testify if this went to court. She looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. "They took my home," she said quietly. "They took my savings. They made me feel like I was crazy for questioning them. If you can make them answer for that, I will do whatever it takes." I gave her my email address and asked her to send everything she had. Before we parted ways, she mentioned another name, Howard Finch. He had been targeted the same year, she said. He might still have records, too. Howard Finch was harder to find. But I tracked him down through a property transfer record from 2020. He was more cautious than Elena. He agreed to meet only after I sent him copies of my certified county documents, proving that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. When we finally sat down together at a public library 2 towns over, he brought a thick folder of his own. He had paid $19,000 before realizing something was wrong. Unlike Elena, he had not sold. He had hired a lawyer and fought back, but his lawyer had advised him to settle quietly rather than pursue criminal charges. The lawyer said it would cost more to prosecute than I had already lost. Howard explained. He said these people had connections. He said it wasn't worth the risk. Howard had taken the settlement and walked away, but he had never stopped collecting information. His folder contained not just his own documents, but research into other properties Christine Gray's group had targeted. He believed there were at least 5 victims over the past 7 years, possibly more. I returned to my motel room that evening with a plan taking shape in my mind. Confrontation would not work. It would only alert them that I knew too much and give them time to cover their tracks. Instead, I needed to build a case so complete that they could not escape it. I created a digital folder and began organizing everything my certified county documents. The fake lien and demand letters from Christine Gray, the wire transfer instructions pointing to Raymond Voss's personal account, Elena's emails and receipts, and Howard's research. I verified that my state was a one-party consent jurisdiction, which meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other party. I purchased a small audio recorder and tested it in different positions: shirt pocket, jacket lining, and car console. I needed options. Then I made a calculated decision. I called Christine Gray's number and told her I was still trying to arrange the money but needed more time. I asked if there was any flexibility on the deadline. She was quiet for a moment. Then her voice turned almost friendly. "Mr. Johnson, we understand these things take time. We can extend your deadline by 72 hours. A pause. "However, there will be a late fee of $5,000 added to your balance. The new total is $52,000. $5,000 for 3 days. They were not just collecting fake debts, they were farming them, adding charges each time a victim hesitated. I thanked her politely and said I would be in touch. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but I had recorded every word. I spent the next hour researching how to file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Their website had a consumer fraud division specifically for cases involving deceptive business practices and financial exploitation. The filing process was straightforward. I could submit documentation online and request an investigation. But I hesitated. Filing too early might tip them off before I have enough evidence. I needed the recording from my next interaction. Ideally one where Christine or Raymond explicitly acknowledged that they knew my property was outside their jurisdiction. I needed them to admit, on tape, that this was not about unpaid dues. This was about taking money from people who did not know they could fight back. I was reviewing my evidence folder one more time when I noticed something had been slipped under my motel room door. A plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, me sitting across from Elena Ruiz at the diner, taken through the window from the parking lot. On the back of the photo, someone had written in neat block letters, "Mind your own business. Last warning." I stood there holding the photograph, my pulse steady despite the cold spreading through my chest. They had followed me. They had watched me meet with their former victim. And now they wanted me to know that my investigation was not a secret. But they had miscalculated. A warning only works if the person receiving it is willing to stop. I was not willing to stop. I was just getting started. And now I had proof that they were actively surveilling me, which meant I had evidence of witness intimidation to add to my file. The question was whether they would stop at warnings or escalate to something worse. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing with notifications. It was not even 7 in the morning, but the screen showed dozens of alerts from local community forums I had joined while researching the area. I opened the first one and felt the ground shift beneath me. Someone had created an entire thread dedicated to warning the community about the out-of-town scammer trying to steal lakefront property. The post included photographs of me at the coffee shop, at the diner with Elena, standing outside the county recorder's office. Each image was captioned with inflammatory language designed to reframe everything I had done as evidence of criminal intent. The comments section had already exploded with outrage from people who had never met me, repeating accusations they had no way of verifying. I tried to respond with a calm explanation and attached my certified county documents proving that my property was not part of Lakeview Estates. My comment was deleted within minutes. I tried posting independently with the same evidence. The post was removed and my account was suspended for spreading misinformation. Christine Gray's group had not just launched a smear campaign, they controlled the narrative. Anyone who challenged their version of events was silenced before they could be heard. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at my phone, watching my reputation disintegrate in real time while I was locked out of every platform where I might defend myself. A knock on my door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. The motel manager stood in the hallway, his expression uncomfortable but firm. There had been complaints, he said. Multiple guests had seen the posts and did not feel safe staying at the same property as someone accused of fraud and threats. He needed me to check out by noon. I asked if he had verified any of the accusations. He shook his head. I'm not a judge, sir. I just run a motel. He walked away before I could respond. I stood in the doorway, processing what had happened. In less than 12 hours, Christine Gray had turned me from a property owner into a pariah. She had weaponized the community without having to prove a single claim. The pattern was elegant in its cruelty, legal intimidation first. Then social destruction. Strip away every support structure until the victim has no choice but to pay or flee. I packed my bag and drove to my property. Maybe I could at least walk my own land, see the house I had purchased, feel like something in this nightmare was real. But when I reached the gate, a new sign had been installed alongside the 3 parked trucks. No trespassing property under HOA management violators will be prosecuted. Greg Nolan stood with his arms crossed, watching me approach. Heard you've been having a rough morning, he said. Maybe it's time to reconsider your options. Pay what you owe, and all of this goes away. I told him I did not owe anything. He shrugged with practiced indifference. The community disagrees. And in my experience, the community usually wins. I drove away without responding. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the effort of containing my anger. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and called my title insurance company. The representative was polite but non-committal. They were reviewing the situation and would be in touch soon. I asked for a letter confirming my clear title. She said the legal department needed to approve any official correspondence and could not give me a timeline. I hung up feeling more alone than I had since this started. The one institution designed to protect property owners was hiding behind bureaucratic delays while my life was being dismantled. I thought about calling the police. But what would I report? Someone posted accusations about me online. Someone took pictures of me in public. None of it rose to the level of criminal activity, at least not in any way local law enforcement would prioritize, especially if Christine Gray really did have the connections she claimed. I sat in my car, staring at the highway, trying to map out my remaining options. Elena and Howard had given me their documentation, but their testimony alone might not be enough. I had recordings and evidence of a pattern, but no smoking gun, nothing that proved Christine Gray and Raymond Voss knew they had no legal authority over my property and were extorting people anyway. I needed someone who had seen the operation from the inside, someone who could explain how the scheme worked and provide documentation that could not be dismissed as the complaints of disgruntled outsiders. Without that, I was just another voice shouting into a void that had been engineered to ignore me. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. The message was brief. They did the same thing to me 3 years ago. I was on the HOA board before they pushed me out. I have documents they don't know I kept. If you want to end this, meet me tonight, 7 p.m., fishing pier at Miller's Point. Come alone, they're watching you. And they're watching me too. I read the message 3 times. It could be a trap. Christine Gray's group could be luring me somewhere isolated where there would be no witnesses. But the details felt specific: someone who had been on the board, someone pushed out, someone who had kept documents. That suggested genuine insider knowledge. I typed back, "Who?" The response came immediately: Derek Murphy, former treasurer. I quit before they could make me complicit. But I saw everything they were building, and I have proof. I searched the name against the Secretary of State records I had downloaded. Derek Murphy appeared in HOA filings from 4 years ago as treasurer, then vanished from all subsequent documents. His departure coincided with the first property seizure I had been able to verify through Elena's timeline. The pieces fit, if he was telling the truth. He had left right when the scheme began scaling up, if he was lying. He knew enough about the organization's history to construct a convincing story. Either way, he had information I needed. The question was whether meeting him would give me an ally or deliver me into an ambush. I spent the next several hours preparing for both possibilities. I charged my phone and audio recorder. I emailed copies of all my evidence to Elena, Howard, and my own backup account with instructions to forward everything to the state attorney general if they did not hear from me by midnight. I wrote down the details of where I was going and why, sealed it in an envelope, and left it with the clerk at a 24-hour copy shop with instructions to open it only if I did not return by morning. It was not a perfect safety net, but it was better than nothing. If something happened to me, there would be a trail. At 6:30, I drove toward Miller's Point. The fishing pier was at the edge of a county park that closed at sunset, isolated enough for a private conversation. Public enough that someone screaming would probably be heard. I parked in the empty lot and walked toward the water. The sun was dropping toward the tree line, turning the lake into a sheet of copper and gold. I saw a figure standing at the end of the pier, silhouetted against the fading light. He was alone. He was waiting. I walked toward him, my recorder running in my jacket pocket, my phone set to dial 911 with a single tap. Derek Murphy turned as I approached. He looked tired. He looked scared, but more than anything, he looked like a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to finally listen. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We don't have much time. Let me tell you how this really works." Derek Murphy spoke quickly, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes as if expecting someone to emerge from the tree line. He had been the HOA treasurer for 2 years, he explained, handling the books for what he initially believed was a legitimate neighborhood organization. The first year had been normal, collecting dues from the 12 homeowners in the subdivision, paying for road maintenance and common area upkeep, filing the required reports with the state. Then Christine Gray joined the board. She brought Raymond Voss with her as legal consultant, and within 6 months, everything changed. They started identifying properties adjacent to the subdivision parcels that were not legally part of the HOA, but were close enough that new owners might not know the difference. Bankruptcy auctions, tax sales, foreclosures. They targeted buyers who were unfamiliar with the area and unlikely to have local connections. "Raymond is the one who designed the whole system," Derek said. "He used to work at the county assessor's office. He knows exactly how property records work, how liens are filed, what makes a document look legitimate. Christine handles the confrontations because she's convincing she looks like someone's grandmother until she starts threatening you. But Raymond is the architect. He drafts every fake document, creates every shell company, sets up the accounts where the money disappears. The others, Greg, Evelyn, they're just muscle and witnesses. They make it look like an organization instead of a small group of criminals." I asked how many people they had targeted. Derek shook his head slowly. "At least 7 that I know of, maybe more. Not everyone pays. Some people fight back, like you're trying to do. But most people just want the problem to go away. They pay, or they sell, and Christine's group picks up the pieces." He handed me a folder he had been carrying under his jacket. Inside were printed emails, internal communications between Christine, Raymond, and the other board members. One thread discussed the Morrison property and how to approach the new auction buyer. They had been planning this before I even closed on the purchase. Another email outlined the timeline for escalation: initial confrontation, demand letter, social pressure, then final resolution. The phrase final resolution was never defined, but the context made it clear either the target paid or they were forced out by any means necessary. There was also a spreadsheet tracking previous targets' names, amounts demanded, amounts collected, and outcomes. Elena Ruiz was on the list. Howard Finch was on the list. 5 other names I did not recognize were on the list. The total amount collected over 6 years exceeded $300,000. I asked Derek why he had kept all of this. He looked out at the darkening lake for a long moment before answering. "Because I knew someday someone would need it," he said quietly. "I tried to stop them from inside. I told Christine that what they were doing was fraud. She told me I could either keep my mouth shut and keep my position, or I could leave and see what happened to people who talked. I left. I've been waiting 3 years for someone who was willing to actually fight back. Most people just disappear after they lose. You're the first one who started building a case instead of running. I told him I intended to do more than build a case. I intended to end this. He nodded slowly, something like hope flickering behind his exhausted eyes. The next morning, I drove to the county seat and walked into the state attorney general's satellite office. I had prepared a formal complaint outlining everything: the fake liens, the unlicensed attorney impersonation, the wire transfers to personal accounts, the coordinated social harassment, the pattern of targeting vulnerable property buyers. I attached Derek's internal emails, Elena's payment receipts, Howard's documentation, and my own certified county records proving the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. The intake officer reviewed my materials with growing interest. She said they had received complaints about predatory HOA practices before, but rarely with this level of documentation. She could not promise immediate action, but she assured me the Consumer Fraud Division would open an investigation. More importantly, she gave me direct contact information for the lead investigator and encouraged me to continue gathering evidence, particularly any recordings that captured explicit admissions of fraudulent intent. My next stop was the county sheriff's office. I had called ahead and requested a meeting with someone who could discuss potential criminal charges. Deputy Brittany Martin met me in a conference room and listened as I walked her through the timeline. She was skeptical at first. HOA disputes were usually civil matters, she explained, not criminal ones. But her expression changed when I showed her the threatening photograph that had been slipped under my motel door, the emails proving premeditation, and the spreadsheet documenting years of systematic extortion. "This is more than a billing dispute," she said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at fraud, extortion, and potentially witness intimidation." I asked if the sheriff's office would be willing to assist if I could get Christine Gray or Raymond Voss to make incriminating statements on recording. She considered this carefully. "We can't run a formal sting operation based on a civil complaint," she said. "But if you're having a conversation on your own property you legally own and you happen to record it in a one-party consent state, that's your right. And if something criminal happens during that conversation, we can respond." I called Christine Gray that afternoon. I told her I had reconsidered my position. The community pressure had worked. I was ready to settle, but I could not pay the full amount immediately. I proposed a partial payment of $30,000 as a show of good faith, with the remainder to follow within 30 days. She was quiet for a moment, calculating. Then she agreed. "We'll meet at the property tomorrow at noon," she said. "Bring a cashier's check. We'll have paperwork for you to sign that will formalize the payment arrangement and your acknowledgement of the HOA's authority." I told her I understood. I told her I would be there. I did not tell her that I would be recording every word, that Deputy Martin would be parked a quarter-mile down the road, or that the paperwork she planned to have me sign would become evidence of attempted fraud. Derek had warned me what to expect. "They won't come alone," he had said. "Christine will bring Raymond to handle the documents. Greg will be there for intimidation. They'll try to get you to sign something that admits you were wrong, that you acknowledge the lien, that you accept the HOA's jurisdiction. Once you sign that, they have legal cover. It becomes your word against a document with your signature on it." I had no intention of signing anything, but I needed them to present it. I needed them to explain it. I needed them to say out loud, on recording, exactly what they were doing and why. That evening, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was empty. The body contained only 2 sentences. "We know you've been talking to Derek Murphy. Tomorrow will be your last chance to make this right." I read the message 3 times, then saved it to my evidence folder. They knew. They had been watching Derek, too. Or they had sources I had not anticipated. But their threat revealed something important. They were nervous. They would not be sending warnings if they felt secure in their position. Nervous people make mistakes. Nervous people overreach. And tomorrow, I was going to give them every opportunity to overreach as far as they wanted. They thought tomorrow would be my last chance. They had no idea it would be theirs. The morning was overcast, the kind of gray sky that makes everything feel muted and uncertain. I arrived at my property an hour before the scheduled meeting. Deputy Brittany Martin had already positioned her unmarked vehicle at an abandoned barn a quarter-mile down the road, close enough to respond within 90 seconds, far enough to remain invisible. I had tested my audio recorder 3 times that morning. I had a backup recorder in my car. My phone was fully charged with the voice memo app running as a third layer of redundancy. Derek Murphy had wanted to come, but I had convinced him to stay away. If this went wrong, someone needed to remain free to continue the fight. He had agreed reluctantly and given me his phone number to text if I needed immediate assistance. I parked near the gate and waited. At exactly noon, 3 vehicles appeared on the dirt road: Christine Gray's silver SUV, Greg Nolan's pickup truck, and a black sedan I had not seen before. The sedan worried me. It meant they had brought someone new, someone who had stayed in the shadows until now. The vehicles stopped in formation, blocking the road just as they had on my first day. Christine emerged first, clipboard in hand, wearing the same navy vest with the Comic Sans logo. Greg followed, positioning himself to my left with his arms crossed. Evelyn Watson stepped out of Christine's SUV and moved to my right. Then the driver's door of the black sedan opened, and I finally saw the man Derek had warned me about. Raymond Voss was older than I expected, late 60s, silver hair combed back, wearing a charcoal suit that looked expensive but slightly outdated. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the deliberate pace of someone who believed he controlled every room he entered. His face was pleasant in a generic way, the kind of face that could sell insurance or deliver bad news with equal ease. He stopped a few feet from me and extended his hand. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I'm Raymond Voss, legal counsel for Lakeview Estates. I understand we've reached an arrangement." I shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm, but his palm was damp. Nerves. He was not as confident as he appeared. Christine handed me a manila folder containing several documents. "Before we accept your payment, you'll need to sign these," she said. "Standard acknowledgement forms. They confirm your recognition of the HOA's authority over your property and your agreement to abide by our covenants going forward." I opened the folder and pretended to read. The first page was titled Acknowledgement of Lien and Settlement Agreement. The language was dense, filled with legal-sounding phrases that meant nothing but would look binding to anyone who did not know better. I flipped to the second page. It required me to affirm that my property was subject to Lakeview Estates CC&Rs. I looked up at Raymond Voss. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I need to understand something. My property, the Morrison Ranch, can you show me exactly where it falls within the CC&Rs? Raymond's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "The CC&Rs cover all properties within the Lakeview Estates community," he said. "Your parcel is adjacent to our managed area, and therefore subject to our governance." I nodded slowly, as if considering this. "But the CC&Rs I reviewed at the county recorder's office show a specific boundary," I said. 12 lots within a surveyed plat. My parcel has a separate legal description. It predates the subdivision by 40 years. I paused, watching his face. "So I'm confused about how your CC&Rs apply to land that wasn't included in the original filing." Christine and Greg exchanged a glance. Raymond's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Legal boundaries can be complicated," he said. "The important thing is that this community has operated under a unified governance structure for years. Your property benefits from our roads, our security, and our community standards. That creates an implied obligation." "Implied obligation," I repeated. "That's not the same as recorded jurisdiction." "Is it?" Raymond's pleasant expression hardened. "Mr. Johnson, I've been doing this for a long time. I know how property law works. I know what documents matter and what documents don't. The county recorder can file whatever they want. What matters is who has the authority to enforce. And in this community, that's us." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've seen people like you before. You think that because you found some paperwork that contradicts ours, you have leverage. But paperwork doesn't matter when the community believes us and not you. Paperwork doesn't matter when every neighbor thinks you're a fraud. Paperwork doesn't matter when you can't set foot on your own property without our permission. He was almost smiling now, confident in his intimidation. The CC&Rs are irrelevant. Mr. Johnson, what matters is who controls the situation, and right now, that's not you. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I asked, very quietly, so you're saying you know my property isn't legally part of this HOA, but you're demanding payment anyway? Raymond's smile vanished. He realized, too late, what he had admitted. Christine stepped forward quickly. That's not what he said. You're twisting his words. But I had what I needed. The admission was on tape. They knew my property was outside their jurisdiction, and they were extorting me regardless. I reached into my pocket and pressed the button. Derek had given me a small radio transmitter linked to Deputy Martin's receiver. What happened next took less than 2 minutes. A sheriff's cruiser appeared at the end of the road, lights flashing. Deputy Martin and Sheriff Dan Caldwell stepped out and walked toward us with deliberate calm. "What is this?" Christine demanded, her voice rising. "This is a private HOA matter." Sheriff Caldwell ignored her. He addressed all 4 of them in a tone that left no room for argument. "I'm Sheriff Dan Caldwell. We've received a complaint regarding fraud, extortion, and impersonation of legal counsel. I need everyone to remain where they are while we sort this out." Raymond Voss tried to recover. "Sheriff, this is clearly a misunderstanding. We're simply conducting routine HOA business." The sheriff nodded toward me. "Mr. Johnson, do you have documentation supporting your complaint?" I handed him my folder, the certified county records, the fake lien, the internal emails Derek had provided, the spreadsheet of previous victims. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each one. "Mr. Voss," he said finally, "are you a licensed attorney in this state?" Raymond hesitated. "I provide legal consulting services. The licensing requirements for consultants are different. Yes or no?" "Mr. Voss, are you listed with the state bar?" Another hesitation. "No." Sheriff Caldwell turned to Deputy Martin. "Read them their rights." The next several minutes were a blur of formal procedures, Miranda warnings, handcuffs, requests for identification. Christine protested loudly that she was a respected community member, that this was harassment, and that they would sue the county. Greg Nolan said nothing. Evelyn Watson started crying. Raymond Voss remained silent, his face a mask of controlled fury. As they were escorted toward the patrol vehicles, Raymond turned back to look at me. His voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard every word. "You think you've won something? You have no idea who else is involved. This is bigger than us. You've just made enemies you can't even see." I watched them drive away, the flashing lights disappearing around the bend in the road. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the release of tension I had been carrying for days. I had done it. I had exposed them, but Raymond's final words echoed in my mind. Bigger than us. Enemies I could not see. The 4 people being taken into custody were the visible face of this operation. But Derek's emails had hinted at money moving to accounts beyond Raymond's control. Someone had funded the shell companies. Someone had provided the inside knowledge about which properties to target. The battle was won, but the war might not be over. The 48 hours following the arrests felt like emerging from underwater. I had been holding my breath for so long that I had forgotten what normal breathing felt like. Christine Gray, Raymond Voss, Greg Nolan, and Evelyn Watson were processed on preliminary charges of extortion, fraud, and criminal impersonation. Raymond faced additional charges for practicing law without a license. The judge denied reasonable bail for all 4, citing flight risk and the organized nature of the scheme. The State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Division officially opened an investigation, coordinating with the Sheriff's Office to review my evidence. Deputy Brittany Martin warned me that the legal process would take months: arraignments, discovery, and possible trials. But she also told me the AG was treating this as a pattern case and reaching out to every victim on the spreadsheet. If they established a multi-year fraud scheme, the charges would escalate significantly. I drove to my property that afternoon. The gate was open. The trucks were gone. The no trespassing sign had been removed by deputies. I parked in front of the farmhouse and stepped out into the air that smelled like pine and lake water. The place needed work, missing shingles, a sagging porch, and weeds reaching my knees. But it was mine. I touched the weathered siding and looked through dusty windows at rooms I had never been allowed to enter. No one would ever stand at that gate again and tell me I did not belong here. I allowed myself 5 minutes to absorb that feeling. Then I got back in my car. There was still work to do. The community response shifted faster than I expected. The same forums that had attacked me were now filled with retractions. Someone posted a news article about the arrests, and suddenly the narrative reversed. I was no longer the out-of-town scammer. I was the victim who had fought back. The motel manager called to offer a free week's stay as compensation for the misunderstanding. I declined. I did not need apologies. I needed people to remember what had happened and question the next accusation they saw before joining a mob. Whether they would learn that lesson was beyond my control. My title insurance company finally sent confirmation that no liens existed on my property and apologized for the delay, apparently. Raymond had contacted them posing as a legitimate creditor, creating confusion that bought him time. Those connections were unraveling now. Elena Ruiz called me 3 days after the arrests. Her voice sounded lighter than I had ever heard it. The AG's office had contacted her for testimony, and they had informed her that victims might be eligible for restitution from seized assets. She would never recover the years of stress or the home she had lost. But there was a chance she could get some money back. Howard Finch received a similar call. So did 3 other names from the spreadsheet. Derek Murphy was cooperating fully, providing documentation that strengthened the broader case. The scattered victims Christine and Raymond had exploited were becoming the network that would ensure their conviction. For the first time since this began, I felt something beyond relief. I felt like the system was actually working. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. Then the lead investigator from the AG's office called with news that reframed everything. The financial analysis of Raymond's accounts had revealed an unexpected pattern. Over 6 years, approximately $320,000 had flowed into accounts controlled by Raymond and Christine, but nearly $90,000 of that money had been transferred to a separate account, one that did not belong to any of the 4 people in custody. The receiving account was registered to a limited liability company in another state. The ownership structure was layered behind shell corporations designed to hide the ultimate beneficiary. "We don't think Voss was the top of this operation," the investigator said. "He was the operator. Someone else was taking a cut, someone who stayed invisible the entire time." I thought about Raymond's final words as he was led away. "You have no idea who else is involved. This is bigger than us." I had dismissed it as desperation, a last attempt to frighten me into backing down. Now I understand it differently. Raymond had not been making threats. He had been stating facts. Derek had mentioned Raymond's connections from his time at the county assessor's office. He had hinted at relationships that extended beyond the visible group. If someone else had been funding the operation or feeding information about which properties to target, that person was still free, still invisible, still potentially looking for the next victim, or looking for revenge against the person who had exposed their income stream. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun sink toward the lake. The water turned gold, then orange, then deep purple as darkness spread across the sky. I had won something real. The people who had tried to steal my home were facing justice. The victims were being heard. The community had seen the truth. But the victory felt incomplete in a way I could not ignore. Somewhere, someone was counting money they had stolen from families like Elena's and Howard's. Somewhere, someone was reading about the arrests and calculating their next move, whether to disappear quietly or to eliminate the loose end that had unraveled their operation. The visible heads had been cut off, but the root might still be alive underground. The legal system would continue its work. Investigators would follow the money through the shell companies. Prosecutors would build their case and perhaps identify the hidden beneficiary. My part was nearly finished. I had gathered evidence, recorded confessions, and helped bring 4 criminals to justice. What came next required resources and authority I did not possess. But I could not shake the unease that settled in my chest as the last light faded from the lake. Raymond Voss had smiled when he warned me about enemies I could not see. At the time, I thought he was bluffing. Now I was not certain. The 4 people in custody had been willing to threaten, lie, and destroy reputations to protect their scheme. What would the person above them be willing to do? I locked my door that night for the first time since moving in. My recorder sat on the nightstand, still loaded with evidence. My phone was charged and within reach. The farmhouse creaked in the wind, settling into sounds I had not yet learned to recognize. I told myself the danger had passed. The criminals were in jail. The investigation was proceeding. The system was working. But sleep did not come easily. I lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar silence, and wondered whether the person who had stayed invisible for 6 years would remain hidden, or whether they would eventually step out of the shadows to protect what remained of their investment. The wheel of justice was turning. I just did not know yet if it would crush everyone who deserved it.